Okay, so in this video, I'm going to teach you how to solve rational inequalities. Okay, when you solve rational inequalities, keep in mind that cross multiplication is not allowed because the main reason behind that is when you multiply both sides by a random value, we're not sure if the inequality will be reversed. Take note that for inequalities, when you use a multiplier that is a negative number, the inequality sign will be reversed. Now, since we don't know exactly whether this will be, so this one is a positive or negative number, then we cannot cross multiply. Okay, another thing, when you solve rational inequalities, the first one of the things that you have to check is whether one of the sides, normally the right side, is already 0. If the other side is not yet equal to 0, then you have to transpose the value so that the other side will be equal to 0. For instance, if the rational inequality, so this is a what if given was x squared minus 16 over x and then less than or equal to 2, then that means you have to transfer or transpose 2 first on the other side to make the right side equal to 0. Okay, and afterwards you have to do some you need to combine the two expressions, and that will be x squared minus 16 then minus 2x. So I'm not going to do the step by step anymore. This is just to show you what you can do when you have a value or a rational inequality with a value on the other side. Okay, and then you simplify that, so that means x squared minus 2x minus 16 over x less than or equal to 0, and that will look like our example in this video. Okay, so again, when the other side is not equal to 0, you have to transpose the value and combine as a single fraction before you proceed with the normal or the steps in solving rational inequalities. Okay, so knowing that, so let's go back to our main problem, and that is to solve the inequality x squared minus 25 over x squared plus 2x, and it says greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so let's focus on this now. When you have checked, okay, so this is basically your first step to check if the other side is equal to 0, and in this case, yes, it's already 0. Okay, the next step for that or after that will be to factor the numerator and the denominator of the other side, the left side. Okay, so x squared minus 25 is x minus 5 and x plus 5, and then on the denominator, that's not a special product, but you can have x as a common factor, so factor that out, and then you have x plus 2. Then this is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, once you have factored the expression, the next step is to, so let's number so that you will not be confused later on. Number 1 is to check if one side is 0, and then do some preliminary steps if it's not equal to 0. Okay, number 2, so what we have done is, so this is our step number 2. We did some factoring, and then our third step is to make a what we call table of signs. So this will lead us in finding the proper combination of signs. Okay, so what is the use of that table of signs? Okay, if you take a look at our given inequality, it's a combination of a product of x minus 5, x plus 5, and then divided by x, and then x plus 2. Now, if our goal is to have a greater than or equal to 0 value, then that means we have to keep this left side a positive expression. And since it's a combination of 4 expressions, we have to think of, like, say, one possible case, and there are other cases that we can have, is that every factor is positive. Okay, but that's not the only case. We can also have all the expressions negative, meaning to say negative times negative is positive, negative and negative in the denominator is also positive. So a positive numerator over a positive denominator is positive. So that means greater than or equal to 0. Now the problem with that is you have to consider, or you have to look for all the possible combinations by randomly assigning some signs. And for that matter, you might miss some possible solution to the inequality. So the table of signs will actually make that organized. Okay, so I'll be teaching you the steps on how to create a table of signs. So the first thing that you have to do is to list down all the factors that you see in the expression on the left. So I have to list down x minus 5, list them down vertically, x plus 5, you have the single x, and then you have the x plus 2. Okay, then after that you identify where these factors, or what values of x, or what value of x can make each factor equal to 0. In the first factor, that means when x is 5, because 5 minus 5 is equal to 0. In the second, it's negative 5. For the third, it is 0 because it's x, so the only value that will make it 0 is 0. X plus 2 is negative 2. Once you have identified all those numbers, start creating a number line just below the last factor. Okay, and then on that number line you have to place the numbers that you can see here respectively, or accordingly. So if this is 0, then that means far to the left is negative 5, you have negative 2 closer to 0, and then you have the positive 5. Then for each factor, you need to create a vertical line. Okay, so 0, yes, 0, and then 5. So what happened to our number line is that we have divided it into several intervals, and that means before, let's put a red mark, before negative 5, between negative 2 and negative 5, or between negative 5 and negative 2, between negative 2 and 0, between 0 and 5, and then after 5. Okay, so next step is to know the signs of x minus 5 in each interval. Okay, so to do that, first plot where the x minus 5 will be 0, and we said that it will be 0 at x equals 5. So as you can see, we have placed a 0 on the 5, okay, on this line. Okay, you can also do that already with all the other factors. X plus 5 will be 0 at negative 5, x will be 0 at 0, and then x plus 2 will be 0 at negative 2. Okay, so this will be your boundaries. So how do you fill up this with the signs? Okay, so let's focus first on the first factor. For the first factor, this is the long way of doing it. Okay, so you focus your attention on the x minus 5 in this 0. Okay, so this means that when we place numbers less than 5 on 5 minus 5, what do you think will happen? Okay, say if I place 4, 4 minus 5 is a negative number. So this means that x minus 5 is negative under 0 to 5 interval. Okay, and if you do that also on the negative 2 to 0, that will be the same case. Like say negative 1 minus 5 is negative 6. So that's a negative sign. And then a negative sign. And then also a negative sign if you repeat the process. However, when you place a number bigger than 5, say 6, the x minus 5, when this is 6, so 6 minus 5 is equal to 1, which is a positive number. And all the other numbers that you will choose that are greater than 5, that will be the same case. It will be positive. Okay? Now, there is a general pattern when it comes to placing these signs. Now, there is an importance to the placement of these zeros because they will act as boundaries. Okay, as you can see, before the 0, we have negative, all negative to the left, and then after 0, it became positive. So it's a turning point, okay, of the signs from negative and then positive. Okay, note however that this is not always the case. There will be cases in which the positive signs will appear first before the negative signs, and that means when you place a number on a factor, you get a positive expression on the left and the negative expression or negative value on the right. Okay, in general, that will happen if the x is minus x. Say instead of x minus 5, we are given negative x minus 5. When the coefficient of x is negative, these signs will be reversed. All this negative will become positive, and all this positive, or the rest here positive, will become negative only when the x has a coefficient that is a negative value. Now, doing that the same process to all the other factors, we have x plus 5 will be 0 at negative 5. So that means the first sign, so sorry we don't have enough space, so this is negative. Let's use a white ink. So that's a negative, turning point 0, so positive, 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 and then positive. Then do the same for x as a factor, so it's negative, 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 positive, and then positive. Then negative, negative, positive, positive, and then positive. So what we have done with the table of signs is that we have created all the possible combinations for the signs, and we have about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 combinations. Okay, now out of this within these combinations, you have to get the conclusion that it will give you. Okay, so that means simply use the rule of signs, that when you have negative times a negative, that's a positive, then another negative, so it became negative again, but you have another negative here, so the conclusion is a positive sign. Do the same thing for negative and a positive, that's negative, and then another negative, it's negative, and then negative, so that will give you a conclusion that is negative. The third one, do the same thing. You will see that it will become positive. This is negative and this is positive. Okay, so these are the conclusions that you can have for the given inequality x minus 5 times x plus 5 over x times x plus 2 greater than or equal to 0. So going back to our focus, this is what we want. Greater than or equal to 0. A greater than or equal to 0 means it is positive. So we will get all those combinations that led to a negative, or a positive rather, a positive sign. So positive, positive, and positive. Okay, so finally identify these intervals where you have the positive signs, and the first one is from negative infinity up to negative 5, and then from negative 2 up to 0, and then from 5 up to positive infinity. Now, very critical in the final solution is the placing of a bracket or a parenthesis. Okay, now remember, in a given interval we do a bracket if we want to include the number, but we use parenthesis if the number or numbers are not included. Okay, so how do we determine whether we have to close or to have an open parenthesis? Okay, so this is your guide. Take note that in the factored form of the expression, only x and x plus 2 are in the denominator. So that means those numbers that will make them 0 cannot be a possible answer for this. Okay, because we have greater than or equal to 0, so it means we can include some of the numbers but not all. Okay, so we have to exclude those numbers that will make the denominator equal to 0. Okay, so that means for negative 5, that's an close. Negative 2, you cannot have negative 2. 0, you cannot have 0, so open. 5 is the value for the numerator, and for the infinity they're always open. Okay, then connect these intervals using the union sign, meaning to say we have to consider all those intervals. Okay, now in this example, I particularly selected one with greater than or equal to 0 because I want to emphasize that idea of including or excluding the numbers in the endpoints, or in the endpoints. So, but if the case is that this is strictly greater than or strictly less than, then there is no chance that a value will be included in the interval, meaning the values here that will make the factors 0, because we cannot have or we cannot include equal to 0 in the rational inequality. Okay, but if you have greater than or equal or less than or equal, then you have to check what numbers can you include in the final answer. Okay, so basically in solving rational equations you have 3 steps. Seems like it's a long way to solve rational inequalities, but you will get used once you have solved a lot of inequalities. You will get used to it and you will find it easy. Okay, so some final notes. Always check if one side is 0. If it's not 0, then you have to do something with the inequality, like transposing the value to the other side and adding the fractions to become a single fraction. Okay, number 2 is to check whether you can factor the expressions, and in most cases you will really have to factor. There are only rare cases in which the expressions are already in factored form, so factoring is essential in this problem. And then you have to practice on creating table of signs. If it is not clear to you right now, just by watching it one time, then review the video again and go through the part in which where I discuss how to create the table of signs. Okay, and then finally pick up the right combination of signs that will lead to the goal, which is in this case greater than or equal to 0. If the goal was less than or equal to 0, then we should be selecting the minus sign instead. Okay, so you have to take note what is a goal in the inequality. Okay, finally, select or get all those intervals, and do not forget to use a union sign to say that all these intervals are part of the solution. In some textbooks, the solution set can be written in this way, SS. You use this symbol, which means it includes all these intervals that we have solved. Okay, so that's it.